Hi, and welcome to Manual of Arms. Today we're here in my war room, and I want to do a quick primer on some of the United States military rifles from around 1870 to 1945. I don't have everything. I'll eventually try to fill in the gaps, but I'll show you what I have and we can talk about it. The first rifle I'd like to discuss is the Trapdoor Springfield Model 1888 pattern. This particular one had an integral rod bayonet. This was kind of an experimental thing that the United States was playing around with. It was eventually squashed by Theodore Roosevelt in the advent of the 1903. The 1903, which we'll get to, initially actually had a rod bayonet, but it was quickly done away with. This was the final form of the Trapdoor Springfield. So it's based on an 1884. You can see right here it says U.S. Springfield. On the mechanism up here, it'll say 1884. This is not an 1884. Like I had said, ones with the rod bayonets, with some exceptions, are almost always 1888s. 1884 rod bayonets are very rare. So we eventually did away with this. This was a black powder cartridge in 4570. We decided that we wanted to go with a repeater. Enter the Krag. Now this is the Krag model 1898. There were several variants before that. The Krag 1892, 1894, 1896, and finally here we go, the 1898. This was the final form of the Krag. The United States held trials when they were developing their first repeating small arm. One of the benefits that the U.S. saw with the Krag was this loading gate mechanism. They thought it was great, nice ease of loading. You just drop the rounds in, shut the door, and you're ready to go. It also had a magazine cutoff on this left side, which you can't see here. Again, that was another thing the United States was kind of toying around with, was volley fire. We still were at the age where volley fire was an acceptable form of warfare, and we quickly learned that that was no longer really applicable. In fact, it was documented that there were hundreds and hundreds of rounds dropped during Roosevelt's charge up San Juan Hill, and I would assume it was because of this loading gate. Under pressure, I'm not so sure that the American GIs could load properly, and as a result, rounds were dropped. We were up against the Spanish Mauser in 7mm, which used stripper clips. And we quickly found that that was a superior way to load. So a couple things, right? We still went with our blade bayonet. We still have this Buffington style rear sight, same as the Trapdoor. And we have our bolt, which was a Norwegian design based on Ole Krag's design. So we went with Norway's design and we adopted it. It was in 3040 Krag, which we found quickly to be anemic. And then just as a side note, here is an 1899 cavalry carbine. This one was made in about 1902. But again, shortly thereafter, we did away with it. And we went to the Springfield 1903. The Springfield 1903 was essentially a ripoff of the Mauser action. In fact, after World War I, we dealt with the ramifications of that because Mauser actually sued, and the United States actually owed Mauser. I forget how much, but it was pennies on every dollar that they sold these for. So this is essentially a Mauser action. Has the same style safety flag. It does have a magazine cutoff because we still wanted to go with them. But it's really just a Mauser 98 in 30-06. So this originally was a little bit different. It had a rod bayonet similar to this, but Teddy Roosevelt, like I said, squashed it. In about 1906, we took all the rod bayonet rifles back to the factory. We rechambered them from 30-03 to 30-06, which is a Spitzer cartridge, which I have actually right here. This is a World War II cartridge, but pointed nose, very similar to 8mm Mauser. The Springfield 1903 was fielded during the First World War, and it was one of the most iconic weapons for the United States. But this was not the rifle that we used primarily. We used the Model 1917. There were 3 Model 1917 rifles for every 1 Springfield rifle that was fielded in action. The Model 1917 started out its life as a model, or a pattern 14, I should say. We were making this rifle in 303 British for the British in our factories in Remington and Winchester. When the war broke out, or when we joined the war, World War I, we decided we needed more rifles. So we cut that contract, and we ended up revamping their rifles, rechambering it to 30-06, and basically made this rifle our own, the Model 1917. They were made at 3 factories: Winchester, Eddystone, and Remington. Eddystone was a subsidiary company of Remington. This particular one is made by Remington, but it's a cock on close, so it's a little different than your Springfield 1903, which is a cock on open, similar to a Mauser 98. One interesting feature about this are these sights. I mean, they're basically battle sights. And if you look at the remaining rifles I'm going to show you, we retain this battle sight. So I think this rifle was ahead of its time, and it's largely underrated as a United States military weapon. They are getting a little more scarce to find in this condition. Most of them were sporterized because a lot of people wanted to use them as hunting rifles. But these 2 rifles were our primary arms in the First World War. Moving on, for the Second World War, we started fielding the final form of the Springfield 1903, the Springfield 03A3. Now, unlike the 1903, which had a much different rear sight, you can see here, we have that nice battle sight that you saw in the 1917. These were produced at Remington and Smith Corona. This is a Remington model. And they were mostly used in the Pacific Theater by the GIs and Marines. This one hasn't been refurbished or re-arsenaled, so I try not to shoot it or touch it really all that much. This is the final form of the Springfield 1903. Lastly, we have one of the most iconic weapons, or as General Patton said, the finest battle implement ever invented. The M1 Garand, M1 Garand, whatever you want to call it. He was Canadian. I still don't really know how he pronounced his name. This was our first semi-auto weapon that was our primary infantry rifle. This one was made at Winchester. The stock is a little rough, but I needed it because it was a Winchester. So this was in 30-06 as well, semi-auto, and we used it well into Korea, if not longer. We used this in conjunction with the M1 carbine, which was more of a specialized carbine for specialized troops. But, in my opinion, I think a semi-auto main battle rifle gave us the edge over some other countries that were not using semi-auto weapons as their primary rifles. So there you have it. United States weapons from 1870 to 1945. I hope you enjoyed my rant, and I hope to see you next time.